I have never heard of a Christian being killed or harassed here in Jabo. They go to their church freely.
It was late on Christmas night, spilling into the early hours of December 26th, when the sky above Jabo village turned red. The villagers were home when they heard it. A sound like nothing they've ever heard before. A roar, then a blast, then flames streaking across the darkness. The ground shook, roofs rattled, and then silence. The villagers rushed outside. Something had fallen from the sky. It had crashed into a field just 500 meters from the village's only health clinic, setting a farmer's hut on fire. The wreckage was still burning slowly when they reached it. They thought a plane had crashed here. It hadn't. What they were witnessing, though they didn't know it yet, was the arrival of American military power in their backyard. Munitions launched from maritime platforms in the Gulf of Guinea, with strikes executed using MQ-9 Reaper unmanned aircraft, had just struck targets in the forest near their homes. Thousands of miles away, President Donald Trump was already online, announcing what he called a powerful and deadly strike against ISIS terrorist scum. He called it a Christmas present. But in Jabo, a quiet, predominantly Muslim farming community in Sokoto State, nobody understood what was happening. There were no ISIS fighters here, no religious conflicts. Christians and Muslims had lived side by side for generations. The villagers couldn't sleep that night, and in the morning, when Nigerian Air Force bomb squads arrived to secure the debris, the people of Jabo were left with a question nobody could answer. Why us? To understand why American missiles fell on Sokoto State, you have to understand what was growing in the forest along Nigeria's northwestern border. They call themselves the Lakurawa. The origins of the group are murky, but researchers have traced them back to Malian herdsmen who fought as part of the Seleke militia in the Central African Republic around 2012. After clashing with military forces in Mali and Niger, they drifted south, eventually crossing into Nigeria's Sokoto State sometime around 2017. At first, they were welcomed. Local communities, desperate for protection against the bandits terrorizing the region, hired these heavily armed foreigners to fight back. And for a time, the Lakurawa delivered. They pushed out bandit groups. They provided security. Then, they turned. The herdsmen turned militiamen began imposing their own brutal version of Sharia law. They levied taxes on villagers. They punished anyone who violated their code. Men caught shaving their beards. Women deemed improperly dressed. They carried out raids, kidnappings, assassinations. By 2022, Nigerian security forces had pushed the Lakurawa back into Niger. But after a coup in Niger in July 2023 suspended joint border patrols, the group re-emerged again. By late 2024, they were back, stronger, better armed, and now suspected of receiving support from the Islamic State Sahel province. In January 2025, Nigeria officially designated the Lakurawa a terrorist organization. But here's where the story gets complicated. The Lakurawa operates in Sokoto State, a region that is overwhelmingly Muslim. The victims of their violence are almost entirely Muslim. Bishop Matthew Hassan Kuka, the Catholic Bishop of Sokoto, has said publicly that Christians in his region do not face persecution. Meanwhile, the terrorist group with the clearest, most documented ties to ISIS, the Islamic State West Africa Province, or ISWAP, operates on the other side of the country, in northeastern Nigeria. So, when American missiles struck Sokoto on Christmas night, targeting what the US called ISIS camps, analysts were puzzled. If this was about ISIS, why strike here? If this was about protecting Christians, why target a region where Christians aren't the ones being killed?
I had a loud sound, followed by an explosion.
This American strike indicates the government's failure to protect us.
On November 1st, 2025, President Trump issued a threat. Quote, if Nigeria's government continued to allow the killing of Christians, he wrote, the USA will immediately stop all aid and assistance to Nigeria and may very well go into that disgraced country, guns a-blazing. He instructed the Pentagon to prepare for military action. Quote, if we attack, he promised, it will be fast, vicious, and sweet. The message was clear. Nigeria was permitting a genocide against Christians, and America was ready to intervene. But the claim didn't match reality. Nigeria is home to roughly 220 million people, split almost evenly between Christians and Muslims. The country does face extraordinary violence. In 2025 alone, more than 12,000 people were killed by armed groups. Nearly 6,000 violent incidents were recorded across the country. But this violence isn't religious persecution. It is the product of decades of governance failures, ethnic tensions, competition over land and water, and the ever-growing threat of jihadist insurgencies that kill indiscriminately, most of these funded by foreigners. Boko Haram and its offshoots have slaughtered Muslims and Christians alike. Bandits in the northwest kidnap for ransom regardless of faith. Dangerously armed herders continue to kill farmers in attacks carried out in farming communities. Although the conflict has been documented by analysts to have been largely driven by climate change and resource scarcity, Nigeria's government rejected Trump's characterization outright. But Trump wasn't backing down. Around that same period, late October into early November, Nigeria was redesignated a country of particular concern.
I am hereby making Nigeria a country of particular concern
for religious freedom violations, a designation Trump had first applied in 2020, near the end of his first term, before the Biden administration reversed it. For Trump, Nigeria had become a symbol, a rallying point for American evangelicals who had amplified narratives of Christian persecution in Africa for years. Now, whether the narrative was accurate mattered less than whether it resonated. Nigeria faced an impossible choice here. On one side, a US president threatening military action with or without consent. The possibility of American forces entering Nigerian territory unilaterally, a humiliation no sovereign nation could accept. On the other, a genuine security crisis. The Lakurawa were growing stronger. Nigerian forces were overstretched, outgunned, and struggling to contain violence on multiple fronts. And so, Nigeria made a calculation. If America was going to strike anyway, better to be a partner than a target. In the period leading up to Christmas, communication channels between Abuja and Washington were active. Nigerian officials later confirmed that intelligence was shared and that the operation was discussed at senior levels between both governments. The coordination, they said, was handled through the US Department of Defense and United States Africa Command, with Nigeria kept informed of the plan. What Nigerian authorities have not disclosed is the full scope of that coordination, how long it lasted, or exactly what piece of intelligence were exchanged. What is confirmed, however, is this. The targets were located in the Bounty Forest axis of Tangaza local government area in Sokoto State, a sparsely populated stretch of forest several kilometers from Jabo, a farming community in neighboring Tambowa local government area. On the day of the strike, Nigeria's Foreign Minister Yusuf Tuga spoke by phone with US Secretary of State Marco Rubio. According to Tuga, the central issue was not whether an operation would take place, but how it would be framed.
It's a very serious matter for us and for our region. It's not about religion. It's not about who said what. It is about getting the results. So we're ready to work with others in fighting terrorism.
Nigeria's position was clear. Any action had to be presented as counter-terrorism, not a religious intervention. Well, after that call, Tuga briefed President Bola Ahmed Tinubu. The operation went ahead with Nigeria's consent. Shortly after midnight, In the early hours of December 2026, the operation began. From maritime platforms positioned in the Gulf of Guinea, the United States launched a coordinated strike into northwestern Nigeria. The attack was carried out using MQ-9 Reaper unmanned aircraft, which deployed 16 GPS-guided precision munitions against 2 suspected terrorist camps. Nigerian authorities said the targets were located in the Bounty Forest axis of Tanganza local government area, Sokoto State, an isolated stretch of forest believed to be used by Lakurawa militants as a staging ground. The explosions were felt far beyond the target zone. In Jabo, a farming community in neighboring Tambuwa local government area, residents said their homes shook as the night sky lit up. Fires burned in the distance. Debris fell from the air hundreds of kilometers away in Ofa, Kwara State. Residents later discovered pieces of metallic wreckage scattered across fields and roads. Debris, Nigerian authorities said, came from expended munitions used during the strike. In Washington, President Donald Trump celebrated the operation publicly, describing it as a decisive blow against ISIS-linked militants and wishing Americans Merry Christmas. Hours later, Nigeria's government confirmed the strikes. Officials said the operation had been conducted in partnership with the United States, and that the targets were terrorist camps and that no civilian casualties had been reported.
Now, while investigating this story, we spoke to a News Central correspondent who was on the ground in Sokoto State to give us a report of what he found on the site of the strikes.
I landed in Sokoto on Sunday. On Monday, our first trip was from Sokoto to Tangasa. Tangasa was the first place they said the airstrike hit. So getting to Tangasa, there is a military base around a place called Masalasi. I met the militaries on ground to let them know what we are doing. They said they don't know about any airstrike, but there are some terrorist group at the back of the place too. That the name of the terrorist group is Lakurawa. That they even killed 2 of the terrorist group. They showed that to us. They killed those 2 a day before the day we came to that community. In Jabo, that was where the airstrike hit. But what we saw when we got there, this place was just a plain farm. It was a plain site. It was just like something fell, maybe a big stone fell on the floor. So that was the impact we saw there. According to the community, there's a canister that did not detonate that fell on the floor. That the military guys, they came with e-laws around 5 p.m. to come and take it away from there. But I've been there to the sites that even the government are publishing. I've been there. There was no airstrike there. There was no sign of airstrike there. There was no robust. There was no smoke. The place was just everywhere. Jabo, Tangaza was like, they were living their life like they normally live, like nothing happened. This place is not a forest, it's not a thick forest, it's a plain site. It's a farm, it's a plain farmland. It's not like there's a forest somewhere, there's a thick forest somewhere, there's no forest anywhere.
Were you able to speak with any farmers since you are sure this was a farm?
Those Jabo community guys were the one that told us that a military, because that place was barricaded, that impact floor was barricaded by the police before. So he told us that why the policemen are no more there is because a military e-laws came to pick off that canister that did not detonate.
The community people, did they give you account of Christians being persecuted in either Jabo or the other side?
What I noticed there in both Tangasa and in Jabo, from my time staying there, talking to people, relating with people, they are predominantly Muslims.
So you mean to tell me that the place where President Donald Trump said they were killing terrorists that are persecuting Christians, there is no established Christian community that was being persecuted?
Jude, I will say this again. The Tangasa and Jabo I visited, I can tell you it's predominantly Muslim community.
So he went to the place where the missiles were supposed to hit. He filmed the terrain. He flew drones over the forest. He documented what was there and what wasn't. There were no craters, no blast scars, no debris field that normally follow precision airstrikes. That doesn't mean nothing happened, but it does mean something doesn't line up here. We went into this story looking for answers, but all we found were more questions, deeply troubling questions. For starters, was this operation meant to fight terrorists in Nigeria? or create headlines.
In the days following the strike, both governments declared success. US Africa Command reported that, quote, multiple ISIS terrorists had been killed. Nigeria's information minister announced that 2 major terrorist enclaves had been destroyed. President Trump claimed that every camp got decimated. But the details remain murky. No body count was released. No names of killed militants were confirmed. A Nigerian presidential spokesman admitted it was, quote, unclear who among those targeted were killed. The remoteness of the strike zone made damage assessment difficult. US analysts acknowledged it might take days to fully evaluate the impact. And then there were the questions that didn't have easy answers. Security experts remained divided on whether the Lakurawa even had confirmed ties to ISIS. Some analysts pointed to evidence of connections with Islamic State Sahel province. Others said the links were inconclusive, that the Lakurawa's identity remained murky, and that labeling them as ISIS was more politically convenient than analytically rigorous. If the goal was to strike ISIS, why target Sokoto? When ISWAP, the group with the strongest ISIS affiliation, operates in the northeast? And if the goal was to protect Christians, why strike a region where Christians aren't being persecuted? In Nigeria, the political fallout was swift. Opposition parties accused President Tinubu of surrendering sovereignty, proof that Nigeria's government couldn't secure its own territory. They demanded transparency. Who exactly was killed? Others took a different view. Some analysts argue that partnering with the US was pragmatic, that Nigeria's overstretched military needed help, and that any blow against extremist networks was welcome. But in Jabo, the villagers didn't care about geopolitics. They just wanted to understand why their homes had shaken, why fire had rained from the sky, and why the war they didn't ask for had arrived on their doorsteps. The Christmas strike wasn't just about Nigeria. It was about something far more larger. Across the Sahel, the security situation is collapsing. Military coups in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger have expelled Western forces. The vacuum has allowed jihadist groups, affiliates of ISIS and Al-Qaeda, to expand their reach, carrying out attacks against civilians and soldiers alike. The Sahel is now responsible for more than half of all terrorism-related deaths worldwide. And the violence is spreading south. Groups like the Lakurawa are pushing into Nigeria's northwest. Coastal countries like Benin and Togo are bracing for spillover. In this context, the US strike in Sokoto was a signal to extremist groups, to African governments, to the world at large. America is watching, and America is willing to act. But the strike was also a signal of something else. It showed how easily geopolitics can be filtered through domestic narratives. Trump framed the operation as a defense of persecuted Christians, a message tailored for his evangelical base, regardless of whether it matched the reality on the ground or not. Nigeria pushed back, insisting the operation was about counterterrorism, not religion. But Trump's version dominated the headlines. For ordinary Nigerians, the meaning of the strike depends on where you stand. If you are in a village terrorized by Lakurawa militants, maybe American missiles feel like relief, a sign that someone finally is fighting back. But if you are not, if you are in a peaceful community caught in the crossfire of forces you don't understand, the strike feels like something else entirely. More than 12,000 Nigerians died from violence in 2025. Kidnappings, massacres, suicide bombings. A relentless tide of bloodshed that long predates any American intervention. One night of missiles won't change that. The Lakurawa will regroup, or another group will take their place. The bandits will keep raiding. Boko Haram will keep bombing. The underlying drivers of violence, which are poverty, climate change, governance failures, ethnic tensions, that will all remain. What the Christmas strike did accomplish was this. It showed that when American interests align with African crisis, action is possible. Whether that action is strategic or symbolic, effective or performative, it all depends on who is telling the story. In Washington, this was a victory, proof of American resolve. In Abuja, it was partnership, a necessary compromise to gain access to firepower Nigeria couldn't provide on its own. But in Jabo, it was a mystery, a night of terror that still doesn't make any sense. The sky turned red on Christmas, and by morning, nothing had really changed. So what really happened on Christmas night? I'm Jude Bella, and this is Declassified on News Central.